When he opened the kitchen door, the millionaire found his maid crying, sitting on the floor and eating leftover food. What she revealed next left him completely shocked. Daniel Carter walked into his kitchen a little past 10 at night. He'd just come back from a long business dinner that ran late. The house was quiet. The lights were dimmed like usual, soft and calm, just the way he liked it. He didn't expect anyone to still be up. Most of the staff clocked out by 8, and his girlfriend Sienna had said she was heading to bed early because of a headache. He was heading to the fridge, planning to grab a bottle of water before turning in. That's when he noticed something strange. There was a plate on the floor next to the kitchen island, and next to it, sitting with her knees pulled in, was Maggie, his maid. Her back was to him at first, and for a second he thought maybe she was just picking something up, but then he saw her shoulders move, like she was shaking. "Maggie," he said, confused. She turned around fast, startled, and her eyes were red. She had been crying. She wiped her face quickly with her sleeve and tried to stand, but he waved his hand. "No, it's okay," Daniel said. "You don't have to get up. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said too fast, her voice scratchy. She avoided looking at him. "I was just finishing up some cleaning and figured I'd eat before heading out. Didn't want to dirty another plate." He frowned, glancing at the food. It wasn't anything fancy. A piece of cold chicken, some rice, and a half-eaten apple. It didn't even look like a proper dinner. "You're sitting on the floor," he said softly, almost in disbelief. "I didn't want to be in the way," she replied, trying to smile, but her lip was trembling. Daniel stepped further into the kitchen, slowly, trying not to make her feel worse. He pulled out one of the bar stools and sat down. He'd known Maggie for 2 years. She wasn't loud, never dramatic. She was the kind of person who kept to herself, did her work, and went home. Reliable, quiet, but this wasn't like her. "You look like you've been crying," he said gently. "Did something happen?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I'm just tired." He didn't believe her, but he also didn't want to press. Her eyes were puffy, and her hands were shaking just a little as she reached for the apple again. She stopped halfway, then dropped her hand. He tilted his head. "Are you sure nothing happened tonight?" Maggie didn't answer. She looked like she wanted to, like she was trying to figure out how to say something, but then she just shook her head again. "I really should be going, Mr. Carter. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sit here so long." Daniel stood up as she did. She was wiping her hands on her apron, still avoiding his eyes. The plate was still on the ground. He picked it up before she could. "At least let me get you a clean plate. And please don't eat on the floor again. That's not okay." She paused at that. For a second, she looked like she was about to say something, but then she forced a small nod and grabbed her coat from the hook by the door. "Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow." She left without another word. Daniel stayed in the kitchen for a moment, just standing there with the plate in his hand. He looked down at the cold food again. There was something off. Maggie wasn't the type to fall apart for no reason. And eating on the floor? That didn't make any sense. He placed the plate on the counter and leaned back against the fridge. His gut told him something had happened. Something had upset her badly. He thought about Sienna for a moment, wondering if maybe there had been a misunderstanding or something weird between them. But Sienna had said she wasn't feeling well and went upstairs hours ago. She would have said if something had happened. Still, the image of Maggie sitting there holding back tears didn't sit right with him. Upstairs, the hallway was dark. Daniel passed Sienna's room and noticed the door was slightly open. He peeked in. She was lying in bed with her phone, scrolling through something, not looking the least bit sick. The lights from her screen lit up her face. She didn't notice him standing there. "Feeling better?" he asked from the doorway. She jumped a little. "Oh, yeah. Headache passed. I took something for it." He nodded. "You see Maggie tonight?" Sienna blinked, her face staying still for a second. "Briefly. Why?" She seemed upset. "I found her eating on the kitchen floor." Sienna gave a short laugh, like she didn't believe it. "On the floor? That's weird." "Yeah, weird," he repeated, watching her. She turned back to her phone. "Maybe she's just having a bad day." "Yeah, maybe." He walked off, but something in her voice felt too casual. He couldn't tell if it was guilt or just indifference. Either way, it gnawed at him. Downstairs in a dark corner of the garage, Maggie sat in her car, not starting it yet. She gripped the steering wheel and let the tears fall again. She hated crying like this. She hated feeling this small. She kept hearing Sienna's voice in her head, clear as day. "People like you don't sit at this table. Got it? You're the help. You eat after we're done, and you eat wherever the hell you want, as long as it's not at the same damn table as me." Maggie had stood there frozen, holding the tray of appetizers she had just finished arranging. She hadn't said anything. She never did. Not when someone like Sienna said things like that. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her hoodie and started the engine. She just wanted to get home. She didn't even know why she cried in front of Daniel. He had always been kind, but he was her boss. This was work. Nothing else. She couldn't afford to make things worse. But deep down, something felt broken. It wasn't just about tonight. It was about all the other nights like it. The way people talked to her. The way she let it happen. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't just feel invisible. She felt like she didn't belong anywhere. Maggie had been in the kitchen since just after 4 that afternoon. The house was getting ready for one of Sienna's small girls' nights again. Every few weeks, Sienna would invite 3 or 4 of her friends over to drink wine, gossip, and post photos on social media like they were on some reality show. Maggie didn't mind the setup. She liked keeping busy. It made the time go by faster. And when she was focused on folding napkins or checking the oven timer, she didn't have time to think about how tired she was, or how behind she was on rent again. She had just finished arranging the last of the appetizers. Nothing fancy. Little puff pastries, stuffed mushrooms, and the cheese board Sienna always asked for. Maggie had cleaned every piece of fruit by hand. She was about to take the tray into the lounge area when she heard Sienna's voice from behind her. "Hold it." Maggie stopped instantly. She turned and saw Sienna standing in the doorway with a glass of red wine in one hand and her phone in the other. Her tone was sharp. That fake sweet voice she used around Daniel was completely gone. Now her words were short and cold. "Where do you think you're going with that?" Sienna asked, stepping further in. "I was just taking it to the coffee table," Maggie said, trying to keep her voice calm. Sienna walked slowly around the counter and stopped way too close, staring her down. "You're not joining us, are you?" she said, raising an eyebrow. Maggie blinked. "No, of course not. Because I swear to God, if I see you hovering around my friends like some sad puppy, it's going to be a problem." Sienna smiled then, but it wasn't a nice smile. "Let me make something clear just in case it's still a little blurry for you." Maggie's hands gripped the edge of the tray. "You're the maid," Sienna said, her voice lower now. "You don't hang around while we're entertaining. You come in, drop the food, and you go. That's your role. Got it?" Maggie nodded once, her throat tightening. She kept her eyes low. Sienna stepped even closer. "Also, I noticed you've been cleaning in the dining room lately right after we eat, wiping down the table while I'm still sitting there. Are you doing that to be helpful, or do you just want to be part of the conversation?" "No, I just clean when the dishes are done," Maggie said quietly. "Yeah, well, don't," Sienna snapped. "Next time, wait until I leave the room. I don't want to look up and see you standing there like you think you belong at the table." There was a long pause. Maggie stayed quiet. She could feel her chest burning, not from anger, from embarrassment, from shame, from the same feeling she'd carried since the day she took this job. Sienna looked her up and down like she was nothing. "People like you don't sit at the same table as me," Sienna said, slow and sharp. "This house isn't some charity project. You get paid to do what I don't feel like doing. You serve, you clean, and then you disappear, understand?" Maggie swallowed hard. "Yes. Good." Sienna leaned back, clearly satisfied with herself. "Now go put the tray down and get out of sight. I want everything perfect before my guests arrive." Maggie turned and walked toward the lounge. Her hands were shaking a little, but she didn't let the tray slip. She placed it down gently, adjusted the coasters like she always did, then walked straight back to the kitchen. Her eyes were stinging, but she wouldn't let herself cry. Not yet. Back in the kitchen, she kept herself busy rinsing off utensils that didn't even need rinsing. She needed something to do, anything to stop the knot forming in her chest. She could hear laughter start in the other room. Sienna's voice, loud and full of that fake warmth she always used with her friends. They'd never know the way she talked when no one else was around. Later that night, after the guests left and the noise died down, Maggie stayed behind to clean. She always did. She preferred it when the house was quiet anyway. It helped her breathe. Sienna had already gone upstairs by the time she started wiping down the kitchen counters. She was trying to keep it together, but as she bent down to load the dishwasher, her eyes welled up again. Everything Sienna had said just kept playing over and over in her head. It wasn't the first time, but this time it cut deeper. That's when she gave up and slid down onto the kitchen floor. She didn't plan to cry. It just happened. One minute she was sitting there holding a sponge, and the next her hands were covering her face. She didn't hear Daniel's car pull into the driveway. She didn't hear the front door. She didn't even hear him walk into the kitchen. So when he spoke her name, she nearly jumped out of her skin. And that was the moment he found her, on the floor, crying, holding a plate she hadn't even touched. And even though she tried to brush it off, tried to act like she was fine, Daniel knew something had happened. What he didn't know was how deep it went, and how far Sienna would go to keep her little world exactly how she wanted it. The next morning, Sienna was all smiles. She came downstairs in her silk robe like nothing had happened the night before. Her makeup was already on, her hair freshly curled, and she smelled like that expensive perfume she always wore when she wanted attention. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen island with his coffee, reading emails on his tablet. The second she saw him, her whole expression softened into the kind of sweet face she used like a costume. "Morning, baby," she said, sliding into the stool next to him and pressing a kiss to his cheek. He looked up and smiled without thinking. "Morning. You feeling better?" "Mm-hmm. That medicine worked wonders," she said, stretching. Headaches completely gone. She reached for the coffee pot and poured herself a cup like she did every morning, as if she didn't have staff for that. That was part of her charm. She always made it look like she wasn't too good to do small things for herself, but it was just another move in her game. Sienna was the type who knew exactly how to act when people were watching. Daniel, especially. He went back to checking his messages. She leaned over to peek at the screen, pretending to be interested. "Anything exciting?" she asked in that soft, curious tone. "Just business," he said. "Some last-minute details for the gala this weekend." "Oh, right. That's the one at the downtown hotel, right?" she asked, even though she knew exactly where it was. "Do you want me to come with you?" He nodded. "Of course." She beamed like he'd just invited her for the first time. "I'll look for a dress today. Do you want something elegant or something bold?" He chuckled. "Whatever you want." Sienna reached over and touched his arm. "You always say that, but I want to look perfect for you." Daniel smiled at her, but something about last night still tugged at him. Maggie's face, her tears, her sitting on the floor like she didn't belong anywhere in the house. He didn't want to bring it up right away, but it was still on his mind. "I saw Maggie last night," he said casually, keeping his eyes on his tablet. Sienna took a slow sip of her coffee, then looked at him. "Yeah?" She was still here late, seemed pretty upset. "Oh?" Her tone stayed light. "She was sitting on the kitchen floor eating dinner," he added. Sienna gave a small laugh like it wasn't a big deal. Maybe she was just tired. She's a little dramatic sometimes, isn't she? I've never seen her like that before. "Well, maybe she's got stuff going on outside of work," Sienna said, leaning back on the stool. "We don't really know what happens in her personal life." Daniel paused. "Did something happen between you two last night?" Sienna blinked, tilting her head like she didn't understand the question. "No. Why would something happen?" "I don't know," he said. "She seemed upset right after your party." She shrugged. "I barely spoke to her. I was busy with the girls. She came in to drop off food and then disappeared, like always." Daniel looked at her for a second longer. She met his eyes, holding his gaze like she had nothing to hide. She was good at that. Too good. Sienna leaned closer again, brushing her fingers down his arm. "Why are you worried about her anyway? Did she say something?" "No," he admitted. "She didn't say anything." "Exactly," she said sweetly. "Then you're overthinking." He nodded, but his gut didn't agree. Still, he let it go for now. By noon, Sienna had called her stylist and personal shopper. She wanted 3 dresses brought to the house so she could try them on without leaving. She didn't want to deal with mall people, as she put it. She also had the housekeeper clean the living room twice, even though it was already spotless. Sienna said it needed to sparkle because she planned to shoot content for a brand deal she hadn't even locked in yet. She loved pretending her life was busier and more glamorous than it really was. When Maggie arrived just before 1, Sienna greeted her like nothing had happened. "Hi, Maggie," she chirped from the top of the stairs. "Would you mind starting with the upstairs guest bathroom? I think someone left a bit of a mess up there last night." Maggie nodded, not looking up. "Of course." Sienna waited until Maggie was almost out of sight before rolling her eyes and muttering under her breath, "You're lucky you still have a job." Later that afternoon, Sienna was in the middle of trying on a bright red evening gown in front of her huge bedroom mirror when her friend Lexi called. "Girl, you looked amazing last night," Lexi said over speakerphone. "I know, right?" Sienna grinned. That filter was doing wonders. Lexi laughed. "Hey, not to stir drama, but what was up with your maid? She looked like she was about to cry at one point." Sienna sighed dramatically. "She's just overly sensitive. You know how these people are." They take everything personally. You didn't say anything to her, did you? I barely spoke to her. Sienna lied easily. She probably just had a bad day. Not my problem. Lexi stayed quiet for a second. She seemed sweet though. Sweet doesn't pay the bills, Sienna said, tugging at her dress. And sweet doesn't mean you get to act like you're part of the party. Know your place, right? Damn, Lexi said with a little laugh. You're cold. I'm honest, Sienna replied. And I don't like when people forget who's in charge. Downstairs, Maggie was in the laundry room folding towels, trying to stay out of the way. She wasn't crying anymore, but her chest still felt tight. She hated how her face gave everything away. She hated how one cruel sentence could stick with her for days. She didn't hear Daniel come down the stairs. He walked past the laundry room door and glanced in. He saw her there, focused, quiet, looking tired. He almost stopped to talk to her again, but then Sienna's voice called down from upstairs. Baby, can you come up for a sec? I need your opinion. He sighed and turned around, heading back up. Back in her room, Sienna posed in the mirror, smoothing the fabric of her dress and fixing her hair. She looked perfect, and no one could see who she really was. Not yet. Maggie sat on the edge of the bed in the small room she rented over a garage 2 miles from Daniel's house. The space was barely big enough for the bed, a dresser, and a chair. She'd painted the walls pale yellow herself a year ago to make it feel less like a box. But tonight it didn't matter. The color didn't make it warmer. The room felt empty, like a hotel she hadn't chosen. She dropped her keys on the dresser and kicked off her shoes. Her feet ached. Her back hurt from bending all day. She sat there for a moment staring at the floor, her hands resting on her knees, not moving. There was a framed photo on the nightstand of her and a boy about 10 years old. He had big brown eyes and a shy smile. Her younger brother, Jesse. She picked it up and rubbed her thumb over the glass. He lived with a foster family now. She hadn't been allowed to see him for months. She missed him so badly it felt like a hole inside her chest. She wanted to call, but the caseworker had told her to wait. You're not stable yet, Maggie, they'd said. Let things calm down. The words still rang in her head, over and over, like a lock she couldn't break open. She put the photo down and stood up, walking to the bathroom sink. The mirror was cracked in one corner. She looked at her reflection and barely recognized the tired face staring back. She turned on the tap and splashed water on her cheeks. Her eyes were red from crying earlier, but it didn't matter. No one saw her here. No one cared what she looked like. She thought about the hospital. 2 years ago, she'd been a nurse working the night shift. She'd loved that job, even when it was exhausting. Helping people made her feel like she had a purpose. Then came the night she made a mistake. She'd been on her 3rd double shift of the week. Jesse had called her crying from the foster home, saying he wanted to come home. She'd been distracted. She forgot to check a chart. A patient's medication got delayed. The man survived, but his family filed a complaint. She lost her license. Just like that, everything she'd worked for was gone. The memory made her stomach twist. She sat back down on the bed and pressed her palms against her eyes. She hated thinking about it, but she couldn't stop. The job at Daniel's house was supposed to be a way to start over quietly, to keep her head down, save money, maybe take some classes to get certified again. But every day it got harder. The house was beautiful, but it wasn't hers. She was there to make everything look perfect while her own life stayed a mess. She thought about the way Sienna had looked at her yesterday, like she was trash, like she was in the way. Maggie had worked for plenty of rich families before, but Sienna was different. Sienna enjoyed it. She liked making Maggie feel small, and Maggie hated herself for letting it get to her. She hated how her chest went tight, and her hands started shaking when Sienna's voice cut through the air. She hated how she couldn't say anything back. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She grabbed it, hoping for a message from the caseworker, maybe some update about Jesse. Instead, it was a bank alert. Her account had been charged another late fee. Her stomach dropped. She did the math in her head. Even if she worked overtime all week, she'd still come up short on rent. She pressed the phone to her forehead and closed her eyes. This was the part of the night when Maggie usually tried to distract herself. A TV show, scrolling social media, something mindless. But tonight she couldn't. Her chest felt heavy, like a weight pressing down. She lay back on the bed staring at the ceiling, tears spilling quietly down her face without her even trying to stop them. No sound, no sobbing, just tears. She thought about how she'd been eating alone in Daniel's kitchen earlier, about how stupid she must have looked when he walked in. She thought about how she'd lied and said she was just tired. Of course she was tired, but that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was she didn't feel like a person anymore. Not in that house. Not in her own life. She rolled onto her side and hugged the pillow to her chest. She wished she could tell Daniel the truth. Not everything. Not about Jesse or the hospital, but just about Sienna. About how cruel she could be when no one was watching. But Maggie knew how that would go. Sienna would deny it, smile her perfect smile, and Daniel would believe her. People like him always believed women like Sienna. Maggie had learned that the hard way. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Linda, the other housekeeper. It said, "You okay? I saw her get at you again." Maggie stared at the screen for a while, then typed back, "I'm fine." She put the phone down and wiped her eyes. She wasn't fine, but what else could she say? She sat up again and opened the small drawer of her nightstand. Inside were a few envelopes, bills, letters she never sent, and a folded note from Jesse. She pulled it out and unfolded it carefully. It was written in his messy handwriting from 2 years ago, the last day he'd stayed with her. It just said, "Don't give up on me. I need you." The paper was smudged from where she'd cried on it before. She held it to her chest and closed her eyes, breathing slow. She didn't cry this time. She just sat there, her face blank, her hands shaking. It was like she was two people now. The quiet maid who cleaned up after parties and smiled politely, and the woman sitting here alone, wondering if she'd ever get her brother back, wondering if she'd ever climb out of this hole. She didn't know which version of her was real anymore. She sat like that for a long time until the room grew darker and quieter. Then she finally stood up, changed into her pajamas, and crawled under the blanket. She stared at the ceiling again, thinking about the next day at work, about Sienna, about Daniel's eyes when he'd seen her crying. She told herself to stop thinking, to sleep, but her mind wouldn't stop. It kept running circles around the same questions. How much longer could she keep this up? And how much worse was it going to get before someone finally saw her for who she really was? It was just after 10 in the morning when Maggie arrived at the house. She parked her little gray car in the same spot she always did, right behind the gardener's truck. The sky was gray, and it looked like it might rain, but she didn't really care. Rain actually felt better than the bright fake sunshine that usually lit up the neighborhood. At least with rain, she could hide behind her hoodie and no one asked why her eyes were puffy or her face looked tired. The front door was already unlocked. She stepped inside quietly, the way she always did, and shut it behind her. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the vacuum coming from upstairs. That was Linda. She was always early. She didn't talk much around Sienna or Daniel, but whenever it was just the two of them, when the rich folks were out or still sleeping, Linda would relax a little. They'd worked together for a little over a year now. She was in her 50s, short, with salt and pepper hair and quick eyes that missed nothing. Maggie took off her hoodie and folded it over her arm, walking toward the laundry room. That's where they usually started the day, checking the list on the clipboard Daniel left for them. Linda was already there, wiping down the dryer. "You look tired," Linda said, not looking up. "I didn't sleep much," Maggie replied. Linda glanced at her, then leaned on the counter. "She say something again?" Maggie didn't answer right away. She picked up the clipboard and started scanning the list, pretending to read. "Because I saw her talking to you yesterday," Linda added, "right before the wine party." Maggie nodded slowly. "She told me not to clean while she's still sitting at the table. Said I made her uncomfortable." Linda snorted. "Uncomfortable? She's uncomfortable when someone breathes near her." Maggie looked down at the list again, but she wasn't really reading. Linda walked over and lowered her voice a little. "I've been working in houses like this since before that girl was even born. I've seen this before. These rich young ones, they like feeling powerful. Makes them feel important when they get to talk down to somebody." Maggie sighed. "It's just hard. I keep thinking, maybe if I do everything right, she'll stop." "She won't," Linda said right away. "People like her don't stop. They get bored maybe, but they don't stop." Maggie leaned back against the wall. "I was eating on the floor last night." Linda raised an eyebrow. "What?" "In the kitchen. I sat down because I was too tired to stand. She told me I wasn't allowed to eat at the table. Said people like me don't sit where she sits." Linda's whole face changed. She didn't look surprised. Just angry. Quiet, deep anger. The kind you only see in people who've been there before. She crossed her arms. "That's disgusting." Maggie nodded, but her eyes started to water again. She turned her face away and wiped her cheek. "She said it like it was nothing," Maggie whispered. "Like I was dirt." Linda walked over and put a hand on her shoulder. "You're not. Don't you ever let her make you believe that." Maggie shook her head. She knows Daniel won't believe me if I say anything. She plays the sweet girlfriend so well. He has no idea what she's really like. Linda let out a breath. I've seen this kind of thing before. I once worked for a family in Malibu. The wife was just like her. All smiles and thank yous in front of the husband. But the second he left the room, she'd treat us like trash. Fired a maid for folding her jeans the wrong way. What happened? She got caught, Linda said, cracking a slight smile. There was a nanny cam in the nursery she didn't know about. Husband saw everything. She was out of the house within 2 days. Maggie smiled a little, but it faded fast. We don't have cameras. Not that we know of, Linda said. They both paused for a second, thinking. I'm serious, Maggie. Don't let her break you. You're not alone in this house. You might not see it, but people notice. She's careful, but not that careful. One day, she'll slip. Maggie stared at the floor. I just want to do my job. Get my hours, go home. I can't afford to lose this job. Linda squeezed her shoulder. You won't. She might play mean, but she doesn't have the power to fire you. Only Daniel does. And as far as I can tell, he trusts you. Maggie shrugged. I'm just the maid. No, you're the one keeping this house from falling apart, Linda said firmly. Don't forget that. Just then, footsteps came down the stairs. Both women went quiet. It was Sienna. She floated into the hallway like nothing in the world bothered her. She was already dressed for her yoga class, tight matching set, designer gym bag, sunglasses on her head like she was heading to a photo shoot instead of a workout. She smiled when she saw them. Morning, ladies, she said, sing-songy. You're up early. Always, Linda said, forcing a smile. Sienna turned to Maggie and tilted her head. Maggie, sweetie, can you make sure my pink mat is in the car? I think I left it in the garage. Maggie nodded, keeping her face blank. Sure. Thanks, Sienna said with that syrupy tone. You're a lifesaver. She walked out the front door, tossing a cheerful, see you soon, over her shoulder. The second the door shut, Linda rolled her eyes. Maggie gave her a tired smile. Charm mask back on. Girl, Linda said, shaking her head. If I had $1 for every fake sweetheart I've heard in this house, I could have retired 5 years ago. They both chuckled quietly, but the weight was still there. Later that day, Maggie was wiping down the windows in the upstairs hall when Daniel passed by. He paused, gave her a small nod. Morning, he said. Morning, Mr. Carter, she replied politely. He hesitated for a second, like he wanted to say something else, but then kept walking. He didn't know. Not really. But he was starting to see little things, and little things eventually turn into big ones. Down in the kitchen, Linda watched it all. She saw every glance, every word, every pause. She knew the signs. Something was shifting in that house. And no matter how good Sienna was at pretending, no mask stayed on forever. Daniel sat in his home office with the door cracked open. His coffee was already cold, but he didn't feel like getting up to warm it. He had 3 open tabs on his laptop, 2 spreadsheets, and a proposal waiting on his screen, but he hadn't looked at any of it for the last 20 minutes. His head kept drifting back to Maggie. That image from the night before wouldn't leave his mind. Her sitting on the floor, quiet, like she was trying to disappear into the cabinets. He didn't like that. It bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. His phone buzzed. Sienna. Baby, what time is the wine delivery coming? Should I move my hair appointment? Daniel didn't answer right away. She'd been texting him every hour for something small. First it was a missing bracelet, then a reminder about the dress fitting, then something about a girl she used to know getting divorced, and wasn't that wild? It was all noise. Lately, that's what it felt like. Just noise. He finally typed back. I'll check with the company. Not 5 seconds later, she replied, Thanks, love you. Daniel sighed and closed his laptop. He stood and stretched, then walked out of the office and down the hall toward the kitchen. He wasn't even sure why. Maybe he just needed a break. Maggie was there wiping down the counter. She didn't notice him right away. Maggie? He said gently. She looked up, startled, but kept her hands busy. Yes, Mr. Carter. He hated when she called him that. It made him feel like some old man in a suit. Daniel's fine, he said. She gave a quick nod but didn't smile. Hey, he said, walking closer. About last night. I just wanted to check again. You seemed really upset. Are you sure everything's okay? I'm okay, she said without looking at him. I've never seen you like that before. She shrugged. It was just a long day. He watched her for a second. There was something in the way she avoided his eyes, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. If there's ever anything wrong, "You know you can tell me, right?" he asked. She finally looked at him then. Her eyes were tired, but she nodded. "Thank you." It was quiet for a moment. Daniel shifted. "Hey, random question," he said. "Did you happen to go into the wine cellar yesterday?" She looked confused. "No." "Huh. That's weird," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "Sienna said she thought you might have been in there." Maggie paused. "Why?" Daniel shrugged. "She mentioned something about a bottle missing and said maybe you were grabbing one for the party or something." "I wasn't," Maggie said right away. "I haven't been down there in weeks." Daniel looked at her. She wasn't lying. He could tell. "I believe you," he said. She nodded again, and he could see she didn't want to keep talking. So he gave her a small smile and walked off. It wasn't a big moment, just a short conversation, but it stuck with him. Back upstairs, Daniel found Sienna in the guest room, flipping through fabric swatches with the interior designer she'd hired without asking him. She looked up and smiled like she'd just won an award. "There you are," she said. "Can you believe this fabric? It's from Milan." "Milan, babe. I'm thinking of using it for the new couch pillows." Daniel looked around. "New couch pillows? The ones we have are safe," she said with a fake cringe. "We need something bold, fresh, exciting." He rubbed his temple. "We've had those for 6 months." "Exactly," she said, laughing like that proved her point. He watched her talk for a few minutes. She was in full performance mode, saying "darling" to the designer and talking about how important color therapy is to energy flow. It was all nonsense. Daniel had seen enough real work to know when someone was just playing house. After the designer left, he stayed behind. "Sienna," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "did you tell me Maggie was in the wine cellar?" She looked up from her phone, calm. "Yeah, I thought I heard her down there." "Why?" "She says she wasn't." Sienna blinked, then smiled. "Well, maybe I was wrong. It was loud with the music and stuff. Probably just Linda or someone." Daniel nodded slowly. "Just checking." She walked over and slid her arms around his waist. "Why are you so tense lately?" "I'm not tense." "Yes, you are," she said, her voice sweet and slow. "Is this about Maggie again?" He didn't answer. "You're sweet to care, babe, but she's a grown woman. If something's wrong, she'd say something." He didn't say it out loud, but in his head he thought, no, she wouldn't. Not if she thought she'd lose her job. Sienna kissed his cheek. "Relax, everything's fine." That night, Daniel found himself in the wine cellar. He walked down the narrow steps, flicked on the lights, and looked around. Everything looked normal. Bottles in neat rows, temperature controls steady. Nothing seemed out of place except on the floor by the back shelf he noticed a small scuff. Not huge, but enough to make him stop. It looked like someone had dragged something, a box or maybe a chair, across the concrete. He crouched and ran his fingers over it. A fresh mark. Not dusty like the rest of the floor. He stood up and looked around again. Then he shook his head and left. It wasn't much. Just a scuff. Could have been anything. Still, as he turned off the light and walked back up the stairs, he couldn't shake the feeling. Something was off. And the weirdest part? Sienna had brought up the wine cellar before he ever mentioned it, like she wanted it to be in his head first, like she wanted to plant the idea. Daniel went to bed late that night, the thought still in the back of his mind. It was nothing. Probably nothing. But sometimes, it's the nothings that end up being the beginning of everything. The table was set like it belonged in a magazine. Clean white plates stacked perfectly. Gold silverware lined up with military precision. Wine glasses shining like they'd never been touched. And in the center, a huge bowl of handmade pasta that Maggie had spent the last hour prepping from scratch. Just the way Sienna had asked. Not that she said thank you. This wasn't a huge party. It was just a small dinner with a few of Sienna's friends. Just a casual thing, she'd said earlier, even though nothing Sienna did was casual. She'd spent all afternoon picking the right outfit, checking her makeup in 3 different mirrors, and barking out orders like a mini dictator. Maggie and Linda had cleaned every inch of the dining room, twice. The guests arrived one by one, all of them beautiful and polished like Sienna. They hugged her with fake excitement, snapping pictures before they even sat down. Maggie stood just out of view in the kitchen, listening to the laughs and high-pitched "oh my god" spill into the hallway. Same group as always. Lexi, with her oversized sunglasses pushed up on her head, even though it was nighttime. Brianna, the one who always asked for extra lemon in her water like it was a personality trait. And Fallon, who barely said a word but filmed everything. Daniel came home about 15 minutes into the gathering. He wasn't dressed up, just wearing his usual button-up and dark jeans. When he walked through the door, Sienna lit up like someone flipped a switch. She rushed to him, arms open, voice louder than before. "There he is," she sang. "Everyone, you remember Daniel?" The girls greeted him with flirty smiles and light hugs. He nodded politely, shook a few hands, then looked around the room like he wasn't totally sure why this dinner was even happening. Maggie watched from the kitchen doorway, hands resting on a towel, waiting for her cue. She hated this part, the awkward in-between, where she had to be invisible but also on alert. She glanced at Linda, who was rinsing off extra glasses in the sink. "Think they'll even eat the food?" Maggie asked quietly. Linda snorted under her breath. "They'll poke it with a fork and ask if it's gluten-free." Sienna's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Maggie, you can bring out the salad now." Maggie grabbed the serving bowl and walked into the dining room, her face blank like always. She kept her eyes low and set the salad in the center of the table. As she turned to leave, she heard Sienna say it, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I swear it's like training a cat to do ballet. Takes forever and they still knock something over." The table laughed. Light, casual chuckles. Maggie froze for a second. Her back was still to them, but her ears burned. She didn't say anything. She just walked away. Daniel looked over at Sienna. His brow furrowed slightly. What was that about? Sienna waved it off. "Oh, nothing. She just forgot to slice the cucumbers the way I asked. No biggie." Daniel didn't reply. He picked up his fork and focused on his plate. Maggie went back to the kitchen and set the empty tray down a little harder than she meant to. Linda looked up from the sink. "What did she say? Something about cats and ballet?" Maggie muttered. Linda let out a slow breath. "God help me. One of these days I'm going to throw a sponge at that girl's face." Maggie laughed under her breath, but it didn't last. A few minutes later, Sienna called out again. "Maggie, can you bring the wine?" Maggie carried the chilled bottle and started pouring, going person to person. When she reached Sienna, she leaned slightly to refill her glass, and Sienna turned to Brianna and said, right in front of her, "It's the little things, right? Like having your wine poured without having to say, please." "Love that." More laughter. Another joke disguised as nothing. Daniel cleared his throat. "Sienna, what?" she said, acting innocent. He looked at Maggie. "You okay?" Maggie nodded quickly. "Yes, I'm fine." She turned and walked back to the kitchen, her hands shaking just slightly. She didn't want to cry. Not here. Not in the middle of the damn dining room. Back at the table, the conversation shifted to vacations, fashion, and some new restaurant someone went to in LA. Sienna kept laughing, pouring more wine, acting like she hadn't just humiliated someone on purpose. Every now and then, Daniel would glance toward the kitchen. He knew something felt wrong. He wasn't sure what it was yet, but he wasn't blind. When the main course was done, Maggie cleared the plates. As she leaned over to grab the last one, Sienna moved her glass slightly and said with a smile, "Careful, that's real crystal." Maggie's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. She carried the plates out one by one. Daniel stood and followed her a minute later. He stepped into the kitchen just as Maggie was loading the dishwasher. "She's had too much wine," he said quietly. Maggie didn't stop what she was doing. "It's fine, I'm used to it." "You shouldn't be." Maggie paused, then turned to him. Her eyes were calm but tired. "You didn't hear the worst of it." He blinked. "What do you mean?" She shook her head. "It doesn't matter." He wanted to ask more, but she'd already turned back to the plates. Back in the dining room, Sienna snapped a group selfie and posted it with the caption, "Wine night with my favs, just blessed." Daniel returned to the table and sat down. He didn't smile for the next hour. Later that night, after everyone left and the house was quiet again, Sienna came into the bedroom in a silk robe, wiping off her makeup. "You were quiet at dinner," she said. "Just tired." "You didn't like the cat joke?" He looked at her. "It wasn't funny." She pouted, teasing. "Oh, come on. You know I'm just playing." He didn't say anything. Sienna studied him. "Why are you acting like I kicked a puppy?" "You embarrassed her. She's a maid." "Not a nun," she snapped, then caught herself and smiled again. "Babe, if she's that sensitive, maybe she's in the wrong line of work." He stared at her. Sienna kissed his cheek. "Relax. Everything was perfect tonight." She turned off the light and crawled into bed. But Daniel lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, that feeling in his chest growing stronger. Something was wrong, and he wasn't going to ignore it much longer. It was a Thursday morning, and the sun wasn't even fully out yet. Daniel was already in the kitchen, standing by the window with a cup of black coffee, staring at nothing in particular. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his phone buzzed on the counter, but he didn't pick it up right away. He hadn't been sleeping great, and it wasn't because of work. He kept thinking about the way Maggie looked at dinner the other night. He couldn't let it go. That look in her eyes. That quiet, heavy kind of tired that didn't come from just being on your feet all day. He'd seen it before, years ago, from someone else. The front gate buzzer snapped him out of it. He checked the camera and blinked. A face popped up on the screen that he hadn't seen in almost 5 years. Chris Hammond. Daniel smiled before he even realized it. He buzzed him in and walked to the door, opening it just as Chris's black pickup pulled into the driveway. The truck looked the same, beat up, but somehow still cool, just like him. Chris stepped out in jeans, boots, and a hoodie. No suit, no briefcase, no ego. Just the same old guy who used to talk Daniel into skipping classes back in college. He had that easy grin and tired eyes that came from being out in the real world too long. "Look what the wind blew in," Daniel said, stepping forward. Chris laughed and gave him a hug. "You still got this place looking like a magazine." Daniel shook his head. "It's mostly her taste." Chris raised a brow. "Her as in the one from Instagram?" Daniel groaned. "Don't start." They walked inside, and Chris looked around like he was stepping into another universe. "Man, this place is clean. Credit goes to the staff," Daniel said. "They're the ones that keep it together." As if on cue, Maggie walked in from the hallway with a stack of folded towels. She almost stopped when she saw the unfamiliar face in the room, but Daniel waved her over. "Maggie, this is Chris, old college buddy. He's staying for a few days." Chris smiled at her and stuck out his hand. "Hey, nice to meet you." She shifted the towels to one arm and shook his hand quickly. "You too." Chris nodded, friendly, but didn't push for conversation. Maggie smiled politely and moved on, heading upstairs to finish her work. Once she was out of earshot, Chris turned to Daniel. "She seems quiet. She's great, reliable, always here early, never complains." Chris raised an eyebrow. "You always list out job qualifications when you talk about people?" Daniel shrugged. "I don't know. She's just been through a lot, I think." Chris gave him a look. "And how do you know that?" Daniel took a long sip of his coffee and didn't answer right away. Later that afternoon, Sienna came bursting through the door like she was arriving on a red carpet. She had shopping bags in one hand and her phone pressed to her ear with the other. The second she saw Chris sitting on the couch with Daniel, her whole vibe shifted. She smiled like she was stepping into a photo shoot. "Hey, you must be Chris," she said, walking over in heels too high for the living room. Chris stood and shook her hand. "And you must be Sienna." She giggled, brushing her hair back. "Daniel's told me so much about you." Chris smiled but didn't say anything. She took that as a win and sat down next to Daniel, placing her shopping bags at her feet. "I grabbed a few things for the gala," she said, showing him a dress on her phone. "What do you think?" Daniel nodded. "It looks great." Chris watched the interaction quietly. His eyes flicked toward Maggie, who passed by in the background carrying a tray of glassware. She moved silently, head down. She didn't look at anyone. Later that evening after dinner, Chris and Daniel sat outside on the patio with 2 beers and a blanket of quiet air between them. "Your girl's a little extra," Chris said finally, grinning. Daniel laughed softly. "Yeah." Chris took a sip and leaned back. "But I can tell something's off. The whole vibe in the housing, it's tight, like people are walking on eggshells." Daniel nodded. "It's been like that lately." Chris glanced toward the house. "That girl, Maggie, she seems like she's holding a lot in." Daniel didn't say anything at first. Then, after a beat, "I found her crying a few nights ago, sitting on the kitchen floor." Chris turned to him. "Damn." She wouldn't say what happened, just kept saying she was tired. Chris raised an eyebrow. "And you believe that?" Daniel sighed. "No, but I don't want to push her. She's private." "Or scared?" Daniel looked at him. "Scared? Come on, man. I've seen that look before. That's not someone who's just tired. That's someone who's trying not to fall apart." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know what to do." Chris shrugged. "Start paying attention. Don't just watch her. Watch the way everyone acts around her." The next morning, Chris walked into the kitchen and found Maggie already there, making fresh coffee and organizing the counter. "Hey," he said casually. She looked up, startled. "Hi." He walked over, not too close, and leaned against the counter. "I used to work in kitchens like this, not this fancy though. I was a dishwasher for 3 years. She gave a small smile. "That's honest work." "Yeah, but the chef used to scream at me like I ruined his whole childhood if I missed a spot." She laughed quietly, but it faded fast. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine." Chris nodded slowly. "You don't have to say that just because it's the safe answer." Maggie looked at him, and for the first time she didn't look away right away. "You've known Daniel a long time?" she asked. "Since we were dumb college kids. He used to live in a studio apartment with one broken chair and 3 plates. She smiled again, a little more real this time. "He's not a bad guy," Chris said. "Sometimes just distracted." Maggie nodded. "That sounds about right." Chris watched her for a second longer, then picked up the coffee pot and poured himself a cup. "Hey," he said before walking out. "If you ever need to say something, I listen better than I look." She looked surprised, then smiled again. Just for a second. Chris walked out of the kitchen, but even with the coffee in hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was going on. And now that he was here, he wasn't about to pretend he didn't see it. Maggie didn't expect anything special. Not a cake, not a gift, not even a card. But if she was being honest, she had hoped that someone might at least say it. Just the words, "Happy birthday." She didn't remind anyone. Not Linda, not Daniel, definitely not Sienna. That wasn't the kind of thing you dropped into casual conversation when your job was to stay invisible. But still, the whole way to work that morning, she kept glancing at her phone, half expecting a message from someone. Her screen stayed blank except for a low battery warning and a missed call from a number she didn't know. 36. That's how old she was now. It didn't feel like a special number. Didn't feel like a fresh start or a milestone. It just felt quiet, like every other day, but heavier. When she walked through the front door of the house, it smelled like strong candles. The expensive kind Sienna always burned when she was hosting or taking photos for Instagram. The smell hit Maggie right away. Sweet, but sharp, like vanilla and something fake. There was music playing in the background too, soft and peppy, and Maggie could already tell what kind of day it was going to be. She stepped into the kitchen and saw Linda loading up a tray with drinks. Juice, tea, little bottles of coconut water. Maggie raised her eyebrows. "Another spa day?" she asked. Linda nodded. "Hair and makeup people are upstairs already." Maggie sighed and pulled her apron over her head. Lovely. They didn't talk much after that. There was too much to do. Maggie moved through the rooms like clockwork, polishing the mirrors, checking for smudges on glass tables, fluffing throw pillows Sienna had rearranged half a dozen times already. It was almost noon when Sienna came downstairs in a silk robe, holding her phone up like a mirror. "Okay, everyone, we're live in 3, 2, 1, she said to no one but herself. She walked into the kitchen with her camera still rolling. Maggie stepped back to stay out of frame. She was wiping down the counter but froze when Sienna pointed the phone toward her. "Say hi to my amazing house manager," Sienna said into the screen. "She keeps me from living in chaos." Maggie gave the smallest wave and looked back down quickly. Sienna turned the camera around and whispered into it like she was telling a secret. "She's a miracle worker. Honestly, I'd be in a padded room without her." Maggie held her breath until Sienna walked out of the room. Linda shook her head from across the kitchen. "Is that what I am now? A miracle worker?" "She calls me that whenever someone's watching," Maggie muttered. They both laughed, but it didn't last. The day dragged on. Sienna had people coming in and out all afternoon. A stylist, a photographer, someone delivering flowers she didn't order but pretended she did. Maggie worked through it all without a break, grabbing bites of toast when no one was looking. Every time she passed through the hallway, she checked the front table. Nothing. No card, no note. She knew it was silly to look, but she kept looking anyway. At one point, Chris passed her on the stairs. He smiled like he always did. "Hey," he said. "You holding up?" "Barely," she replied with a half laugh. Chris paused for a second. "You doing anything tonight? After work?" She blinked. "No, just heading home." He nodded slowly. "Cool. Just wondering." Then he walked off, casual as ever. Maggie stood there for a second longer before going back to wiping windows. Later that afternoon, Maggie was in the laundry room folding towels when she heard Daniel's voice in the hall. "She's been here since 7 this morning?" he asked. Linda replied, "Yeah, she's been running around all day." Maggie kept folding, quiet, listening. "You should tell her to take a break," Daniel said. "She won't. You know how she is." Daniel stepped closer to the laundry room door. He looked in and saw Maggie at the counter, her back to him. "Maggie," he said, "why don't you sit for a few minutes? You've been going nonstop." "I'm okay," she said, forcing a smile. "Almost done." He looked at her for a second, then nodded and walked away. He didn't know. She didn't expect him to, but part of her still wished he did. By 6, the house was quiet again. The guests had left. Sienna was upstairs doing God knows what, and Linda had clocked out early to catch a bus. Maggie stayed behind to clean up the mess from the photo shoot. Fabric samples, makeup brushes, half-empty glasses of cucumber water. She moved slower now, her body heavy, her chest kind of hollow. She hadn't eaten a real meal all day. She was just finishing the last of the dishes when Chris walked into the kitchen. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He walked over to the fridge and pulled out a small white box. Maggie watched him confused. He set it down in front of her and opened it. Inside was a cupcake, chocolate with purple frosting and a little white candle stuck in the middle. Maggie stared at it like it didn't make sense. Chris smiled. "I overheard you talking to Linda about birthdays last week. You said yours was coming up soon." She blinked, completely caught off guard. "You remembered?" He nodded. "You don't seem like the type who makes a big deal out of it, so I figured something small." Maggie's throat tightened and she had to blink fast to keep her eyes clear. Chris pulled a lighter from his pocket and lit the candle. "Go on, make a wish." She laughed softly. "What if I already used up all my wishes? Then start over." She stared at the tiny flame for a second, then closed her eyes and blew it out. They sat on the stools at the counter and split the cupcake between them. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had in years. Chris didn't ask questions. He didn't push. He just sat with her, eating cake in the quiet kitchen while the rest of the house pretended she didn't exist. And for the first time that day, Maggie didn't feel forgotten. Daniel had trouble focusing the next day. He was on a video call with a group of investors, but his mind kept wandering. His assistant had gone over the budget twice, waiting for his okay to send it off, but he hadn't said a word. All he could think about was the way Chris looked at him last night. It wasn't even something Chris said. It was the way he kept glancing toward the kitchen, then back at Daniel, like he wanted to say something but didn't want to cause trouble. When the meeting ended, Daniel closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. He stared up at the ceiling and rubbed his eyes. Something was bugging him. He grabbed his phone and opened Instagram. Sienna had posted 4 new stories already. First one, a selfie with a protein shake and a filter that made her skin glow like a cartoon. Second, a video of her doing squats in the home gym. Third, a close-up of a designer perfume bottle with the caption, "Monday Energy." And the fourth, a picture of the living room. Candles lit, a stack of fashion magazines, and the edge of Maggie's arm in the background, blurry and out of focus. The caption read, "My mornings look like this thanks to my angel Maggie." Daniel stared at it for a few seconds. Something about it felt off. The way she used Maggie's name like a prop. The way she called her my angel, when not even 2 nights ago, she'd made that weird ballet joke in front of everyone. He couldn't let it go. He headed downstairs. Chris was in the backyard with a cup of coffee, watching birds like it was the most important thing in the world. Daniel joined him, sipping his own coffee quietly. "Okay," Daniel said after a minute. "Spill it." Chris didn't look at him. "Spill what?" "You've been watching everyone in this house like it's a documentary. I know that look." Chris turned to him and raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly do you think I'm watching?" Daniel didn't answer. Chris sipped his coffee, then said, "You ever ask Maggie what it's like to work here?" "She keeps to herself," Daniel replied. "Maybe because she doesn't feel safe saying what's on her mind." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "You think she's afraid of me?" "No," Chris said quickly. "But I think she's afraid of what might happen if she tells the truth." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, "What truth?" Chris leaned back. "I'm not sure yet. But Sienna's not who you think she is." Daniel let out a dry laugh. "That's a pretty big statement. You've known her what, 1.5 years? Almost 2. And you think that's enough time to really know her?" Daniel looked away. Chris continued, "I'm not saying she's evil or anything, but I've seen how she acts when you're not in the room. It's like she becomes a different person. Maggie walks in and Sienna's whole tone changes. She gets colder, bossier, like she wants to make her feel small." Daniel stayed quiet. He wanted to argue, but deep down, he'd already felt the same thing. He just didn't want to believe it. Chris finished his coffee and stood up. "I know it's none of my business, man, but something's off in this house." After he left, Daniel sat there for a long time. That night, Sienna came into the room wearing a silky robe, holding a glass of wine. She sat on the edge of the bed and scrolled through her phone while talking. "So, guess what Brianna told me today?" she said. "Her trainer got fired for flirting with clients." "Can you believe that? Like, if you can't trust your trainer, who can you trust?" Daniel just nodded, eyes on the TV but not really watching. Sienna kept talking, then suddenly paused. "You okay?" she asked. "You seem weird." "I'm fine." "You're not fine." He looked at her. "Do you like Maggie?" Sienna blinked. "What?" "I mean as a person, not just someone who works here." She laughed, caught off guard. "Why would you even ask me that?" "Just wondering." She took a sip of her wine. "She does her job, that's what matters, right?" "That's not what I asked." Sienna stared at him for a moment. Then her voice got cooler. "I think she's quiet, and honestly, a little stiff. But whatever. She's harmless." Daniel didn't respond. Sienna raised her eyebrows. "Why are you suddenly so interested in Maggie?" "No reason." She stood and walked toward the mirror, still holding her glass. "You know, if you have a crush on her, you can just say it." Daniel turned his head. "What?" "I'm kidding," she said with a laugh, though her tone had sharp edges. "But seriously, you're acting like you want to protect her or something." "She looked scared the other night." Sienna shrugged. "She's always jumpy. That's just how she is." Daniel stared at her reflection. "Did you say something to her? Before dinner that night?" She paused, just for a second. "No. Why would I?" He watched her carefully. She turned back to him with a smile. "Daniel, if you think I'm bullying the help, you've been watching too many movies." He didn't say anything. She walked over and kissed the top of his head. "You worry too much," she whispered. After she went to bed, Daniel lay awake. That pause when he asked her? It was small, but it was there, and now it was stuck in his head like a thorn. The next day, Daniel stopped by the kitchen around noon. Maggie was washing fruit at the sink. He leaned against the counter. "Did you get that raise I mentioned a few months ago?" She looked at him, surprised. "I don't think so." He nodded. "I'll check on that." She smiled softly. "Thanks." He studied her face. The way she smiled, careful, small, like she wasn't sure if it was safe. "Do you feel comfortable here?" he asked. She froze, hands still under the water. "What do you mean?" "I mean in the house. Do you feel respected?" She turned off the faucet. "Why are you asking me that?" "Because I want to know." Maggie looked down, then said quietly, "Most days I do my job and keep my head down." "That's not an answer." She looked at him finally. Her voice was calm, but clear. "I try not to take things personally." Daniel nodded. "And sometimes, do people give you a reason to?" Maggie didn't speak. That silence was all the answer he needed. It started with something small. Sienna came downstairs late that morning, moving slower than usual. Her voice was softer, her steps quieter. No loud greetings, no barking orders, just calm, off. She wore a long sweater and leggings, no makeup, hair in a loose bun like she was trying to look sweet and vulnerable. She poured herself some coffee and sat at the island where Maggie was drying glasses. "I didn't sleep well," Sienna said out of nowhere. Maggie nodded without turning. "Sorry to hear that." There was a pause. Then Sienna added, "It's just been a rough couple of days." Maggie didn't respond. She kept wiping down the last glass. "I'm not the enemy, you know," Sienna said quietly. Maggie stopped for a second, then kept going. "You don't talk to me much anymore," Sienna added. "I try not to bother you," Maggie said calmly. Sienna sighed like she was hurt. "You don't bother me. I know I've been a little tense, but I'm not a bad person." Maggie turned to look at her. "Okay. I mean it," Sienna said. "I get stressed out, and maybe I take it out on the wrong people sometimes, but I'm trying to be better." Maggie gave her the smallest nod, unsure of what this was. An apology? A warning? She couldn't tell. That was the thing about Sienna. She could flip her whole personality like a light switch. One day, cold and sharp. The next, soft and sweet, but always with a reason. That afternoon, Daniel left for a meeting in the city. Chris was out running errands. Linda had the day off, and just like that, the house was quiet again. Maggie was cleaning the pantry, sorting jars and restocking paper towels. Sienna came in, holding her phone. "Hey," she said, "can you help me find my earring?" Maggie turned. "What earring?" "My diamond studs," Sienna said. "The ones I wore during the dinner party last week. I can't find one of them." "Did you check your jewelry tray?" "Twice," Sienna said, sounding annoyed. "It's not there." Maggie walked over and opened one of the drawers, checking behind the boxes. "It's weird," Sienna said, pretending to think. "I know I left it in my room, but I also wore that coat downstairs that night, the white one." Maggie looked up. "Okay. Do you know if anyone moved it?" "I didn't." Sienna nodded slowly. "Can you do me a favor? Check the laundry room just in case. Maggie left the pantry and walked toward the laundry room, confused. She knew for a fact she hadn't touched that coat. It was draped on a chair in the foyer last week. She had seen it. But she hadn't moved it. She hadn't even gone near it. She checked anyway. Nothing. When she returned to the pantry, Sienna was gone. An hour later, Maggie was folding sheets in the guest room when she heard it. A sharp voice from the hall. "Seriously? Are you kidding me?" Maggie stepped out just in time to see Sienna standing at the bottom of the stairs, holding something tiny between her fingers. Daniel had just walked through the front door. He froze when he saw her. "What's going on?" he asked. "My earring," Sienna said. "I just found it." "Okay." She walked over to him slowly. It was in Maggie's coat pocket. Daniel's face changed. "What?" "I swear to God, Daniel, I wasn't even looking. I walked past the coat rack and bumped into it and something clinked. I reached in and there it was." Daniel looked confused. "You think she took it?" Sienna widened her eyes like she didn't want to say it. "I don't want to accuse anyone, but it's not like it just walked in there." Maggie stepped out of the hallway, hearing everything. She froze for a second, then walked forward, her heart racing. "I didn't touch your coat," she said. Sienna turned to her with a look of disbelief. "Then how did it get there?" "I don't know," Maggie said, trying to stay calm. "But I didn't take it." Daniel looked between them, caught off guard. Sienna crossed her arms. "I mean, what are we supposed to do here? Just ignore the fact that something expensive went missing and magically turned up in a staff member's coat?" Maggie's face turned red. "I didn't take anything. I've never stolen from anyone." Sienna looked at Daniel. "We should check the cameras." Daniel hesitated. "There aren't any in the hallway." Sienna looked surprised, or pretended to be. "Then how do we know this hasn't happened before?" Maggie took a deep breath. "I'm telling the truth." Sienna shook her head. "I've been nothing but nice to you." Maggie looked at her, stunned. "What?" "You always seem angry with me and I've tried to be patient," Sienna continued. "But this crosses a line." Daniel raised a hand. "Okay, that's enough. Maggie, can you give us a moment?" Maggie looked at him, her throat tight. "I didn't do this." "I believe you," he said softly. "I just need a second." She walked out of the room, her hands shaking. Her mind was spinning. She had never stolen anything in her life. She couldn't believe what was happening. It felt like a trap. No, it was a trap, and now she was standing in it with no way out. Back in the room, Sienna sat down on the edge of the couch and sighed dramatically. "I don't know what's going on with her lately," she said. "She's been acting weird." Daniel stared at the earring in her hand. "You're sure it wasn't already in that coat?" "Daniel, I'm just asking." Sienna looked offended. "You think I'd lie about this?" "I didn't say that." She stood up and walked toward the stairs. "You need to decide if you trust your staff more than you trust me." Daniel didn't answer. When she was gone, he sat down slowly, the earring still in his hand. Something wasn't right. The timing, the sudden discovery, the way Sienna looked too calm. He knew Maggie. He'd watched her for almost 2 years. He couldn't imagine her stealing. But now he had doubt. And doubt was a dangerous thing. The house felt tense, quiet in that weird way where it wasn't peaceful, just heavy, the kind of silence that sits in your stomach and makes you feel like something's about to go wrong. Maggie stood alone in the laundry room, holding the edge of the counter to steady herself. She had been in shock at first. Now her body was catching up. Her hands were cold, her chest tight. It felt like her whole world was balancing on one bad lie, and nobody seemed to care that it wasn't true. She kept going over it again and again in her head. The way Sienna said it, the tone in her voice, the fake surprise, the look she gave Daniel, like she was trying to seem disappointed instead of proud. But Maggie saw it, the shine in her eyes. That was satisfaction. It had been planned. She didn't know how long she'd been standing there when Chris walked in. He stopped the second he saw her face. What happened? She looked at him, eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She said she found her earring in my coat pocket. Chris blinked. "What?" "She made it sound like I stole it," Maggie said, voice low and shaky. Chris stepped forward. "That's a lie." "I know." "Did Daniel believe her?" Maggie swallowed hard. "I don't know." Chris stared at her for a long second, then ran a hand through his hair. "Where is she?" "Upstairs, probably," Maggie said, acting like nothing happened. Chris shook his head. "This is insane." He walked out before she could stop him. Upstairs, Sienna was sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling on her phone like she hadn't just ruined someone's life. Chris knocked once and walked in without waiting. She looked up, annoyed. You ever heard of knocking? I did knock. Then why didn't you wait? Because I'm not in the mood for games. Sienna leaned back. Oh, here we go. You gonna yell at me like a big brother now? Chris crossed his arms. Did you plant the earring? Sienna stared at him, eyes sharp. Excuse me? You heard me. She laughed. Wow, you've really been spending too much time talking to the help. Don't call her that. Oh, please, she said, rolling her eyes. Maggie is not some angel, okay? She walks around like she's better than everyone. Just because she's quiet doesn't mean she's innocent. You know she didn't take anything. You don't know that either. But I know you, Chris said. And I know what you're capable of when you feel threatened. Sienna stood up slowly. Threatened by who? Maggie? Come on. Chris didn't blink. She's kind. People like you don't know what to do with someone like that. Sienna stepped forward. You think Daniel's gonna believe her over me? Chris stared her down. He might not yet, but it's coming. Downstairs, Daniel was still sitting on the couch, turning the earring over in his hand. He kept thinking about every moment from the past few months. Little things. Maggie flinching when someone raised their voice. The way she always stayed quiet when Sienna walked into a room. How Linda once hinted that Maggie was dealing with more than she lets on. He stood up and walked to the laundry room. Maggie looked up when he entered. Her face didn't show anything this time. Just calm, flat sadness. Like she was past the point of hoping. Daniel walked in and closed the door behind him. I need to ask you something, he said quietly. She nodded. Is there any possible way that you might have accidentally picked up that coat? Maybe someone handed it to you and you didn't check the pockets. No, Maggie said without hesitation. I never touched her coat. Daniel nodded. He believed her, but he had to be sure. I'm going to look into this, he said. Maggie didn't respond. Her eyes just filled up again. I don't think you did it, Daniel added, but I need time to figure out what's going on. I understand, she said. I'd like you to take the rest of the day off. Her stomach dropped. So I'm suspended? No, he said quickly. I just think you need a break. I'll still pay you for the full day. She gave him a weak nod. All right. She left the laundry room without looking back. Daniel stayed behind, staring at the spot where she'd just stood. He hated this. Hated how fast everything spiraled. Hated how calm Sienna had been when she said she found the earring. It didn't feel right. None of it did. Maggie packed up her things slowly. She grabbed her coat off the hook and paused, looking at it like it didn't belong to her anymore. She walked to the front door, passing the living room, where Sienna was now pretending to scroll through emails. Have a good night, Maggie said softly. Sienna looked up with fake concern. I hope you find what you're looking for. Maggie didn't say anything. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. Chris was on the porch. He walked with her to her car. You shouldn't be alone right now, he said. I'll be fine. Chris handed her a small paper bag. I brought leftovers from lunch. You probably haven't eaten. She gave him a tiny smile. Thanks. They didn't say anything else. She drove off. Inside, Daniel went back upstairs and found Sienna in the bathroom, brushing her hair. She left, he said. Good, Sienna replied. This whole thing is so uncomfortable. Daniel watched her in the mirror. You know what's really uncomfortable? She paused. What? Not being sure if the person you're with is lying to your face. She turned slowly. What are you saying? I'm saying if I find out this was a setup. She crossed her arms. You'll do what? Fire me? I'm not your boss, he said. But I'm not an idiot either. She laughed once, bitter and cold. You think I made this up? You think I planted my own earring in her coat? Daniel didn't answer. He just stared at her. Sienna leaned against the doorframe. You're choosing her over me. I'm not choosing anyone, he said. I'm looking for the truth. Sienna stepped closer. You know what the truth is? You've been falling for her. That's what this is. Daniel didn't blink. Sienna smiled. You think I don't notice? You look at her like she's some delicate little puzzle you're trying to solve. It's pathetic. Daniel clenched his jaw. This isn't about her. It's about right and wrong. Sienna shrugged. Same thing in the end. She walked past him, her perfume trailing behind like smoke. Daniel stood in the hallway, heart pounding. He didn't have proof. Not yet. But he had questions. And now he was going to get answers, one way or another. The next morning, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Nobody said much. Even the air felt heavier than usual. Daniel came downstairs before anyone else was awake. He didn't bother with breakfast. He grabbed a coffee and stood at the kitchen island, staring into space like he was trying to put puzzle pieces together that just didn't fit. His mind was going 100 miles a minute, but he wasn't sure where to start. All he knew was this: something didn't add up, and if he kept ignoring it, it was going to blow up in his face. That's when Chris walked into the kitchen, yawning, shirt wrinkled, hair messy like he'd just rolled out of bed. "You sleep?" Daniel asked. "Barely." They sat for a second, drinking coffee in silence. Chris finally said, "You still think there's a chance she did it?" Daniel didn't answer. Chris leaned in a little. "Can I ask you something without you getting pissed?" Daniel raised his eyebrows. "Sure." Chris looked him dead in the eye. "If Maggie wasn't your maid, if she was just some woman you met in the world, would you still be this confused?" Daniel didn't know what to say. He stared at his cup for a second. Chris continued, "You trust her. I know you do. You just don't want to admit what that means." Daniel exhaled. "It doesn't matter what I feel. If she's innocent, I need proof." That's when Linda walked in, still pulling on her gloves. She paused when she saw both of them. "You guys look like someone died," she said. Chris looked at her. "You remember that hallway near the front coat rack?" "Of course," she said. "Why? Does it have a camera?" Linda blinked. "Yeah. There's a little one up in the corner near the vent. It's small, but it's there." Daniel stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his mug. "Wait, seriously?" "Yeah. It was installed like a year ago after that break-in scare. You don't remember?" "I remember getting the system, but I thought the inside cameras were just in the living room and back patio." "Nope," Linda said. "One in the hallway by the stairs, one in the wine cellar, one in the back entrance by the laundry." Daniel looked at Chris. Chris just nodded. "Let's go." The security system was run through a small tablet Daniel kept locked in his office desk. He hadn't touched it in months. It was mostly for motion alerts and front gate logs. Nothing dramatic. But now it felt like it might be the only thing that could tell him what actually happened. They scrolled back through the footage from the day before. It took a while. Hours of nothing. Just people walking past, talking, doing their jobs. Normal stuff. Until it wasn't. Daniel froze the screen. "There," he said, pointing. "That's the moment Sienna asked Maggie to go check the laundry." Chris leaned closer. "Now watch the coat rack." They fast-forwarded 2 minutes. Then it happened. Sienna walked back into frame. Alone. She glanced around, looked over her shoulder, took something from her pocket. Then she leaned forward and slipped her hand into Maggie's coat. Daniel paused the video. Silence filled the room. Chris sat back slowly. She planted it. Daniel didn't speak. He just kept staring at the screen. They let the footage play a little more. Sienna fixed her hair in the hallway mirror like nothing had happened, then walked off. No panic, no surprise, no hesitation. Chris looked at Daniel again. "You need to show her this." Daniel's voice was quiet. "She's not going to admit it. She doesn't have to. She already told the lie." Daniel closed the tablet and leaned back, rubbing his hands over his face. "How did I not see it?" Chris shook his head. "Because she's good at making you feel like the crazy one." Daniel looked out the window. The garden was empty. Everything looked perfect. But inside, he was boiling. "I need to talk to Maggie," he said. Chris nodded. "Yeah, you do." An hour later, Maggie stood in the backyard near the big oak tree at the edge of the property. She had come back to get a sweater she'd left in the guest house. Daniel found her there, standing with her arms crossed, staring down at her shoes like they had answers. When he walked up, she turned and saw the look on his face. Something in it made her stomach twist. "I saw the footage," Daniel said softly. "Maggie didn't move. You didn't do anything wrong." She blinked, barely believing it. It was her. She put it there. "I watched her." Maggie turned away, tears filling her eyes. She covered her face with one hand. Daniel stepped closer. "I'm so sorry." She shook her head. "I didn't think you'd believe me. I didn't want to believe she'd lie like that. I tried to tell you." "I know," he said. "I know." They stood there for a while, the wind moving through the trees. No yelling, no drama, just the weight of everything hanging between them. Daniel finally said, "You don't have to keep working here. Not if you don't want to." Maggie looked at him, confused. "You're firing me?" "No," he said quickly. "God, no. I'm saying you don't have to stay in this house another day unless you choose to. I'll help you find something better, safer, or you can stay, whatever you want. But I won't let her treat you like that again." Maggie wiped her eyes. "What are you going to do?" Daniel's face hardened. "Handle it." Inside the house, Sienna was sitting on the couch, legs curled under her, acting like she didn't have a care in the world. She was scrolling through messages, smiling, sipping a matcha latte. Daniel walked in, holding the tablet. She looked up, pretending to be surprised. "Hey babe, you okay?" He didn't answer. He walked over to the coffee table, tapped the screen, and set the tablet down right in front of her. "Play it," he said. She blinked. "What?" "Hit play." She picked it up slowly and pressed the button. Her face changed as she watched the footage. Her lips parted, then pressed tight. No fake smile. No wide eyes, just cold silence. Daniel crossed his arms. "You lied." She set the tablet down. "You went through the security footage? You made me." Sienna stood up, suddenly defensive. "You're seriously going to act like this is some huge betrayal? You tried to ruin her." "Oh my God, Daniel. She's just a maid." "Stop," he snapped. "Don't say another word." Sienna opened her mouth like she was going to argue, but then she saw the look in his eyes, and she knew. She'd finally gone too far. Sienna didn't speak first. She stood there with her arms crossed and her jaw tight like she was waiting for Daniel to back down. Like maybe if she just held her ground long enough, the truth sitting between them would go away. But it didn't. Daniel stood in front of her, still staring at the tablet on the coffee table. The video had finished playing. It was frozen on the frame of her hand, reaching into Maggie's coat pocket. The silence dragged on. Finally, Daniel said, "Say something." Sienna scoffed. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me the truth." She rolled her eyes and threw her hands up. "Fine. You want honesty?" "Yeah. I put the damn earring there." Daniel's face didn't move. "She's been getting too comfortable," Sienna said, her voice sharper now. "Walking around here like she's some kind of saint. And you look at her like she's the most fragile thing on earth." "That's what this is about?" Daniel asked. "You're jealous of someone who cleans your dishes?" "Oh my God, stop pretending like she's just the maid," Sienna snapped. "You're always watching her, always asking about her. You defend her more than you defend me." "I defend the person being lied about," Daniel said. "You set her up. You humiliated her." Sienna stepped closer, her voice low and angry. "And you humiliate me every time you choose her silence over my voice." Daniel raised his eyebrows. "You think that's what this is? You think I owe you loyalty after you tried to destroy someone's job, someone's life, just to make yourself feel in control?" Sienna's eyes were glassy, but not with regret, with rage. "I gave up everything for you," she said. "I left my apartment, my job, I made your house feel like a home, I fixed your brand, I made you look good." Daniel shook his head. "You didn't make anything better. You made it toxic." She scoffed. "You're such a hypocrite. You loved it when I was on your arm, when people whispered your name at parties like you were some power couple. You loved the way I made you look. I hate the way you make me feel," Daniel said. "That's the difference." That one hit her. She stepped back like it knocked the air out of her for a second. Then she straightened her back and smiled. "Wow," she said coldly. "So you're really doing this?" "I'm done," he said. "Pack your things." "No," she said immediately. "No, I'm not going anywhere. You are. And if I don't?" Daniel didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. He just stared at her, calm and serious. "Then I'll call security. Right now." She stared back at him. For a second it looked like she was about to cry. Her lips trembled slightly. Her eyes darted around the room like she was searching for a way out. But it passed. She blinked it away. "Do you have any idea who you're pushing out of your life right now?" she said. "I think I finally do," Daniel said. Sienna picked up her phone, opened her camera app and aimed it right at him. "You want to play this game?" she said, tapping record. "Fine. Let's tell everyone. Let's show them how Daniel Carter treats women who speak up." He didn't flinch. "You think your reputation's untouchable?" She kept going. "I've got receipts, texts, photos, messages. I can flip the story in a second." Daniel walked over, calm, and took the phone from her hand. He didn't throw it. He didn't break it. He just set it down gently on the counter beside them. "You want to talk about receipts?" he said. "You just confessed. On camera." Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue, then closed. "I'm calling the driver," he said. "You have an hour to pack." "You're making a mistake," she said through gritted teeth. "No," Daniel said. "I made a mistake the day I let you move in." She stepped back slowly, shaking her head. "You don't even see it, do you? You're falling for her." Daniel didn't say a word. That silence was louder than anything. Sienna looked at him one more time, eyes burning, face pale. She picked up her phone, grabbed her purse from the table, and stormed out of the room. Daniel didn't move. He stayed there, staring at the door she walked through. His heart was racing, not because he was scared, but because the storm was finally over, and all that was left now was the mess she left behind. Upstairs, Maggie stood in the hallway just out of sight. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but she'd been walking back from the linen closet when she heard Sienna yelling. Then, Daniel. Then nothing. She stood there frozen, her hand still on the railing, heart pounding in her chest. Chris stepped out from the guest room and saw her. "She's gone," he said softly. Maggie looked at him. "Gone?" Chris nodded. Daniel told her to pack up. Maggie didn't know how to feel. Relief, fear, disbelief. "I didn't want this to happen," she said. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I know," she said, "but it still feels like everything broke." Chris nodded. Sometimes that's how you get to the part where things start to heal. Downstairs, Daniel picked up the tablet again and watched the video one more time. Not because he doubted what he saw, but because he needed to remind himself what it felt like to finally see the truth. Not everyone gets that, and when you do, it changes everything. Sienna didn't pack fast. She slammed closet doors, yanked drawers open like she was trying to break them. The sound echoed through the house. Thumps, bangs, zippers dragging hard, hangers clattering. She wasn't being careful. She wanted people to hear her. She wanted her anger to fill every hallway. Maggie stayed upstairs, in the back hallway near the guest room, folding hand towels that didn't need folding. She could hear everything. The shouting under Sienna's breath, the frustrated stomps across the bedroom floor. At one point, a heavy thud hit the floor hard. Maggie flinched. She didn't go look. She didn't want to see her. Chris leaned against the doorframe of the guest room, arms crossed, watching the hallway like he was expecting something else to explode. Then came the voice. "I hope you're all enjoying this little show," Sienna called out loud enough for anyone in the house to hear. "Because when I leave, things are gonna feel real different around here." Maggie froze. Chris glanced toward the stairs. "She's unraveling. She's dangerous when she feels cornered," Maggie said quietly. "She's already lost," Chris replied. "She just hasn't accepted it yet." Downstairs, Daniel was standing by the front door, waiting. He didn't feel calm. His stomach was tight. His head was pounding, but he wasn't backing down. He'd texted the driver 20 minutes ago. The car was outside. He checked the time. Sienna had 5 minutes left. Then she came down the stairs, dragging 2 expensive suitcases behind her. Oversized sunglasses on her face even though they were inside. Her makeup was flawless. Lipstick perfect. Hair done like she'd just left a salon. She was dressed like she was heading to a red carpet. Not getting kicked out of the house she tried to control. She looked right at Daniel. "You sure about this?" "Yes," he said. "Completely." She smiled, lips tight. "I've walked away from better. Then this should be easy." She laughed and a short, humorless sound. "You think you're gonna feel clean after this? You won't. You'll wake up in 2 weeks, look around and realize you traded diamonds for dirt." Daniel didn't blink. Sienna leaned in just a little. "She's not some innocent little angel, you know. She has secrets too." Daniel stayed quiet. "You don't even know what she did before you hired her, do you?" she whispered. "You don't know what she's hiding." "Whatever she went through," Daniel said, "at least it made her kinder. Can't say the same for you." Sienna clenched her jaw, then gave him one last tight smile. "I'll be back," she said calmly, "when you realize she's not what you thought either." She turned to the driver waiting at the door and handed off her bags, walking out like she was still the one in charge. Daniel didn't move until the car was gone. Only then did he exhale and lean back against the wall. The house went still. Maggie watched the car pull away from the upstairs window. She felt like she should be relieved, but she wasn't. Not yet. She walked slowly downstairs, one hand on the banister, still half expecting Sienna to come storming back in. She found Daniel standing in the hallway by the entry table. He looked up when he saw her. Neither of them spoke right away. Then Maggie said, "It doesn't feel real." "It is," Daniel said. "She's gone." She nodded, but her eyes stayed guarded. "How long until she makes it public?" Daniel sighed. "Doesn't matter. Let her. I've got the truth on video." Maggie looked at him for a long moment, then said, "She said something to me once, when no one else was around." Daniel frowned. "What did she say?" "She told me people like me don't sit at the same table as her, that I'd always be less than because of what I do." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She looked me in the face," Maggie said quietly, "and made sure I knew my place." He stepped closer. "You never deserved that." Maggie gave a small, tired laugh. I didn't even cry. Not in front of her, but I wanted to. Daniel looked at her, like he finally saw all of it. Not just the exhaustion, not just the hurt, but the strength it took to not fall apart. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was happening, he said. You didn't want to believe it, she replied. I get it. No, he said. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have trusted you. Maggie didn't know what to say to that. Chris appeared behind them, leaning on the door frame. She left the upstairs bathroom a mess. I don't think she cleaned a thing. Daniel shook his head. I'll send someone in to deep clean. Chris smirked. Nah, let me help. Wouldn't feel right letting Maggie fix all her damage. Maggie smiled. Just a little. Daniel looked at her. You don't have to stay late today. I'd rather be here than at home, she said honestly. It's quiet there too. Just not the good kind. Daniel nodded. He understood that. The three of them moved through the house in a strange, shared rhythm. They cleaned up Sienna's trail, tossed out old makeup, packed up leftover jewelry she'd left behind like she expected to come back. Maggie wiped the mirrors while Chris vacuumed. Daniel gathered the rest of her shoes and took them to storage. At one point, Maggie opened a drawer in the guest room and found a photo of Daniel and Sienna in a silver frame. It was taken at a charity event. They looked perfect, polished, happy. She handed it to Daniel without saying a word. He looked at it for a second, then set it down in the donation box. Not even worth keeping, he said. By sunset, the house felt lighter, still not peaceful, but not heavy either. Daniel stood in the living room doorway looking around. She spent all her energy trying to make the house look perfect, and still didn't know how to make it feel like home, Chris added. Maggie sat on the couch, quiet, thoughtful. It's strange how someone can fill up a space so much and then the second they're gone, it feels bigger. Daniel walked over and sat beside her. Not bigger, just clearer. Maggie looked at him, really looked. The tension between them had changed. It wasn't awkward. It was honest now. And in that moment, something shifted. The mask that had been sitting between them, fear, guilt, confusion, it was gone. All that was left was truth. And now, everything that came next would be built from that. The day after Sienna left, it was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels calm. The kind that leaves behind tension in the air. The kind where everyone's just waiting for something to go wrong again. Daniel spent most of the morning in his office. He didn't turn on music. He didn't answer calls. He barely touched his coffee. He just sat at his desk going through emails and trying to catch up on everything that had been pushed to the side over the last few days. It was harder than he thought it would be. Every other message had her name in it. Either someone asking if she'd still be attending the gala, or another influencer tagging her in a post she wasn't supposed to be part of anymore. He wanted to delete it all. Downstairs, Maggie was restocking the kitchen cabinets, trying to keep her head down and stay busy. She didn't want to walk around looking like she was waiting for someone to congratulate her just because the truth came out. She wasn't proud. She was just tired. Linda walked in with a crate of groceries from the back door and set it on the counter with a loud thud. Guess who texted me this morning? She said. Maggie glanced over. Who? Sienna. Maggie froze. What? Linda pulled out a head of lettuce. Swear to God. Said I better not start acting like I'm on the wrong team, or she'd make sure the world knew how the staff really treated her. Maggie's stomach turned. She threatened you? Linda held up the phone like proof. She's spiraling. Maggie looked at the screen. It was a long message, full of fake smiles, backhanded comments, and a clear threat buried at the end. Be smart, Linda. You don't want to end up unemployed over someone else's sob story. Maggie stepped back. I can't believe this. Linda laughed, humorless. You should. That girl doesn't go down quietly. Chris walked in halfway through the conversation, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and looked at both of them. She's still talking to people here? Maggie nodded. She just texted Linda. Chris rolled his eyes. She's not done. Not yet. And she wasn't. An hour later, Daniel's phone started ringing off the hook. One of his board members called, asking why Sienna had just gone live online talking about her heartbreaking breakup. Apparently, she was crying into the camera, sitting on a couch that wasn't hers anymore, talking about how she was pushed out of her own home by a man who let the help turn him against her. Daniel didn't even finish the video. He closed it after 20 seconds and rubbed his eyes. He could feel his blood pressure rising. Chris knocked on the office door and stepped in. You seen it? Yeah. She's going full damage control. Daniel stood up. She's not getting away with it. He walked out of the room fast, heading toward the front hall. He grabbed his keys and his phone, then stopped by the kitchen where Maggie was still unpacking groceries. "I need to handle something," he said. "But just know, if you see anything online, if anyone says anything, ignore it. I'll take care of it." Maggie looked up. "I don't care what she says. People like her can spin anything." "I know," Daniel said, "but I'm not going to let her throw dirt without consequences." Daniel left the house and drove straight to Sienna's friend Lexi's place, where she'd been staying since the night she left. The second he pulled up, he could see her car parked in the driveway. She was home. He didn't even knock when he reached the door. He rang the bell and waited. And when she opened it, she looked surprised, like she wasn't expecting him to show up in person. "Daniel, we need to talk," he said, calm but sharp. She stepped aside and let him in, but her attitude was already defensive. She walked back to the couch, where her phone was still propped up on a small tripod like she'd just finished filming. "I assume you've seen my live," she said, sitting down. He nodded. "I have. So has my lawyer." Her face faltered for a second. "You think you can make a name for yourself off this?" Daniel said. "Go ahead. But the minute you cross the line into lying about people, you better be ready for a lawsuit." Sienna rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. I haven't said anything that wasn't true." "You set her up," he said, stepping forward. "And I have it on video." Her face froze. "I gave you the chance to leave quietly," he continued, "to walk away with your head high. But now you're dragging people down just to make yourself feel important." She stood up. "You ruined my life, Daniel. You did that," he said. "Not me. Not Maggie." Sienna crossed her arms. "You think people will believe her over me? I think people are already starting to." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "You always needed someone broken to fix. That's why you picked her. She's the charity project." Daniel stepped closer. "She's a better person than you ever pretended to be." Sienna's hands shook. She looked furious, cornered, powerless. "You think you've won?" she snapped. "You think she's gonna make you happy?" He didn't say anything. "You'll regret this," she said, stepping up to his face. "She's hiding something. I know it. People like her always are." Daniel looked at her one last time. Even if she is, at least she owns her past. He turned and walked out the door. Back at the house, Maggie stood by the window watching a delivery truck pull away from the gate. Her chest felt tight. She'd seen the live, too. Lexi had shown it to her in the laundry room on her phone. Maggie had watched herself be called a liar, a thief, and a manipulator in front of thousands of people. And she hadn't said a word. Chris walked in a few minutes later and saw her still standing there. "She's trying to get under your skin," he said. "She already did." He walked over. "You think people believe her?" "I think people believe what they want to believe." Chris nodded. "But the right people, the ones that matter, they know the truth." She didn't answer. That night, Daniel came home late. The sky was dark, the house calm again. Maggie was sitting in the living room with a book in her lap, but she wasn't reading. He walked in and sat across from her. "She won't be bothering you anymore," he said. Maggie looked at him. "What did you do?" "I told her the next time she says your name in a lie, she'll be answering for it in court." Maggie let out a breath. "She'll find another way." "Maybe," Daniel said. "But not in this house. Not around you." She looked down. "I don't want people to think I caused this." "You didn't?" he said. "She did." Maggie looked up at him. Her eyes were tired but steady. And for the first time, Daniel saw her not just as someone who had survived what was thrown at her, but as someone who refused to be taken down, even when the world tried to shove her into the ground. It was quiet after dinner. Not awkward, just still. The kind of stillness that hangs in the air when two people know there's something left to say, but neither of them wants to be the first to speak. Maggie was in the living room, stacking some books that had been left scattered on the coffee table. She wasn't even sure why she was cleaning. It was already spotless. Maybe she just needed something to do with her hands. Daniel stood nearby, leaning on the edge of the fireplace, watching her quietly. "I owe you an apology," he said. She stopped moving, her hands still resting on the books. "You already said you believed me," she replied. "That's not the part I'm apologizing for." She turned to look at him. "I'm sorry it took me so long to listen, really listen, to trust what I saw instead of what I wanted to believe." Maggie gave him a small nod. "It's okay." "No," Daniel said, stepping closer. "It's not okay. You were being treated badly, and I let it happen under my roof. I should have stepped in sooner." She took a deep breath. "It wasn't your responsibility to protect me." "I think it was," he said softly. "At least to notice, to say something." "You're not invisible, Maggie." You never were. Her eyes started to sting a little, but she blinked it back. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch across from her. You've always carried yourself like someone who didn't want to be a burden. But the truth is, you were the one holding everything together. She let out a small breath. I was just trying to get through each day. I know, he said, and that's what makes it worse. You shouldn't have had to just survive. Maggie sat down across from him, holding one of the couch pillows in her lap. Not squeezing it, just resting her hands on it. I don't like attention, she said. I don't want people to feel sorry for me. They don't, he replied. They respect you. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You asked me before if I felt respected in this house. Daniel nodded. She looked at him. I didn't. Not until now. He didn't look away. I didn't want to tell you about what Sienna was doing, she added. I didn't want to start drama. I've had jobs where speaking up cost me everything. Daniel's expression tightened. Has this kind of thing happened to you before? She nodded. In smaller ways. Comments. Looks. Little things that people like her think don't matter. He sat back, his hands folded together, thinking about how many moments he probably missed, how many times Maggie had quietly held herself together because she didn't have another option. I don't talk about my past much, she said suddenly. You don't have to, he said. Not unless you want to. She looked at him like she was weighing whether it was finally safe. I was a nurse, she said softly, for almost 10 years. Daniel blinked. Really? She nodded. I loved it, but I made a mistake, a big one. I was working back-to-back shifts. My little brother, Jesse, he'd just been placed in a new foster home. I was worried, distracted. I mixed up 2 charts. A patient didn't get his meds on time. He ended up in the ICU. Daniel's face changed. Oh my God. He survived, she added quickly. But they suspended me. Then the review board pulled my license. He didn't say anything. He just let her talk. I tried to fight it, she said, but I couldn't afford a lawyer. My brother got taken away again, and after that everything just slipped. I lost my apartment, took whatever job I could find, eventually ended up here. Daniel looked at her, not with pity, but with something deeper, something like understanding. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have hired me if you knew I had a revoked license? She asked quietly. Daniel leaned forward. Yeah, I would have. She gave him a small, surprised smile. Well, you're not like most people. I think I used to be, he said honestly, before I started noticing the people who weren't speaking. She looked down at her hands. I didn't want to be a problem. You're not, he said. You never were. They sat in silence again for a while, not uncomfortable, just full of everything that had been building up between them. Daniel spoke again. Do you want to go back to nursing? She let out a breath. I don't know. Some days I think about it, but I'd have to go through the whole process again. Take classes, appeal to the board, it's expensive, and honestly, I don't know if I can face it. I'll help you, he said just like that. Maggie looked up. You don't have to. I want to, he said. Not because I feel guilty, but because you deserve a second chance. Her eyes filled, but this time she didn't fight it. She let one tear slip, then wiped it away with the back of her hand. I don't want to be your project, she said, almost laughing through it. You're not, Daniel replied. I'm not trying to fix you, Maggie. I just want to be someone who doesn't let you fall through the cracks again. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe he meant it. I don't know how to start over, she whispered. He smiled, one step at a time. She nodded, biting her lip to stop it from trembling. Then she said, Thank you for listening. Thank you, Daniel said, for finally letting me in. She didn't say anything back, but she didn't need to. Everything had been said, and now, maybe, just maybe, they could finally stop surviving and start living. The days started to feel different. Not dramatic, not like some big shift you could see just by walking through the door, but there was a quiet change in the air. The kind of change you only noticed when you stopped to breathe and realized the tension that used to live in the house was gone. It had been a little over 3 weeks since Sienna left. No one mentioned her name anymore. Her pictures were gone. Her makeup wiped from the drawers, her perfume no longer clinging to the pillows or lingering in the air. It was like the house had been holding its breath for months, and finally, it exhaled. Daniel went back to his normal routines, but even those felt new somehow. He woke up earlier. He ate breakfast at the table instead of at his desk. He actually listened when people talked to him, not just nodded while scrolling through emails. He smiled more, too. Not the fake kind he used at business meetings or parties, but real ones, the kind that reached his eyes. And Maggie? She moved with a little more peace in her steps, not all at once, but little by little. She stopped bracing herself when someone called her name. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. She even started playing soft music while she cleaned, something she never dared to do before. Linda noticed it first. One afternoon, while they were folding towels in the laundry room, Linda looked over and said, "You've been humming." Maggie froze. "I have?" "Yeah," Linda said with a grin. "Little melody, over and over." Maggie smiled. "Didn't even realize." "Well, keep doing it. This house is way too quiet without a little life in it." Maggie didn't say anything, but inside she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Comfort. Later that week, Daniel called her into his office. Not for a problem, but to give her some papers. "What's this?" she asked, confused. He handed her the folder. "You're officially promoted. Estate manager." She blinked. "What?" "No. Daniel, I don't—" "You've already been doing half the work anyway," he said. "Might as well get paid for it." Maggie looked down at the papers. Her salary was almost double what she was making before. Health benefits, PTO, all of it laid out like a life she'd never thought she'd be allowed to live again. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said. "You've earned this." Her voice was shaky. "Thank you." He smiled. "Also, I made a call." Her eyes widened. "To who?" "The nursing board." Maggie's stomach dropped. "I asked about your case," Daniel continued. "Told them I was willing to write a letter. Sponsor your coursework, do whatever it takes." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "Daniel, that's not your job." "I know," he said. "It's something I want to do. Not out of guilt. Not because I'm trying to be some hero, but because you've been doing everything alone for too long." Maggie sat down in the chair across from him, not saying anything for a minute. "I don't even know if I'm ready to go back," she whispered. "What if I'm not that person anymore?" Daniel leaned forward. "You're stronger now. That's not a weakness, that's experience." She looked up at him, her eyes soft but unsure. He added, "When you're ready, I'll be here." The next day, she started looking into the courses. One evening after a long day, Daniel, Maggie, and Chris found themselves in the backyard. The sun had just set, and the sky was a faded orange, the kind of color that doesn't stay long. Chris was grilling burgers. Maggie was slicing tomatoes. Daniel was pouring drinks. No suits. No tension. Just three people who'd been through hell and somehow found a moment of peace. "You ever think we'd end up here?" Chris asked, flipping a burger. Daniel shrugged. "Depends. Where's here?" Chris grinned. "A backyard barbecue with a woman who saved your life and a best friend who still can't cook." "I can cook," Daniel argued. "You can microwave." Maggie laughed for the first time in days. A real laugh, open and unguarded. "You two sound like brothers." Chris nodded. "Grew up together. Same school, same baseball team. He always made the team. I always made the bench." Daniel smiled. "But you got the girls." Chris winked. "Until you got rich." They all laughed. Later that night, after Chris went home and the dishes were put away, Maggie found herself sitting on the back steps alone. The stars were out, and the breeze was light. She wrapped her sweater a little tighter and leaned back, just breathing. Daniel came out quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed her one without saying anything. They sat there side by side, in a silence that didn't need to be filled. "Do you miss her?" Maggie asked softly. Daniel didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I miss who I thought she was." Maggie nodded. "I don't miss the way she made me feel," he added, "like I had to earn her peace." Maggie looked over at him. "You don't owe anyone that." He looked back. "Neither do you." They sat there for a long time, not talking, just sipping tea and watching the sky. It didn't feel like a happy ending. It felt like the middle of something new, and for once, that was enough. A few weeks had passed. Summer was waning. The edges of the house had softened. Daniel and Maggie had fallen into a quieter rhythm. They were figuring out who they were when the mask was gone, and for a little while, it felt like they could breathe again. One afternoon, Daniel arrived home earlier than usual. He stepped out of his car, the sun low in the sky pulling long shadows across the driveway. He saw the mailbox open, a single envelope sticking out. That struck him weirdly. He walked over, unlocked the box, and pulled it out. The envelope was plain, white, with no return address. His heart bumped when he saw his own name scrawled in elegant handwriting across the front. Inside, There was a single folded paper. He unfolded it slowly, glanced at the first few lines, then froze. He stood in the gate reading. The letter said, "Daniel, you don't know the half of it. I left because I had to, but there are things I never told you, things I meant to, before everything broke. This house is full of lies. You better open your eyes before you lose more than your pride." He felt cold. His hands shook a little. He looked around the driveway, half expecting someone to be watching him. He tucked the letter into his back pocket and walked into the house without knocking, then climbed the stairs 2 at a time. He found Maggie in her spare room, sorting through papers. She looked up when he entered. "Something's wrong?" she asked. He closed the door behind him and walked over. He pulled the letter out and she recognized his expression. "What is it?" she whispered. He handed her the note. Her eyes flicked over the words. Her hands trembled. The room felt smaller. "There's no return address," she murmured. Daniel nodded. "It's from her." Maggie's face hardened. She folded her arms over her chest. "Why send this now?" she said quietly. "Why after weeks of silence?" He shook his head. "I don't know." They stood there, letter between them, weight pressing down. Maggie walked to the window, looked out at the garden. She didn't say anything for a minute, just stared. "She's trying to destabilize us," she said finally. "Make me doubt again." Daniel came up behind her and put his hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to doubt." Maggie turned slowly. Her eyes glistened. "But she knows how to cut people where it hurts." Daniel nodded, quiet. They were interrupted by Chris knocking. He cracked the door open. "Hey, we have a package at the front. Thought you might want to see it." Daniel and Maggie exchanged a look. Daniel nodded. Chris came in with a small box. White, bottom slightly bent like it had been carried. He placed it on the desk. Maggie stepped forward and opened it. Inside was a locket, old-fashioned silver, and next to it, a photo that made her freeze. It was a picture of a little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, dark hair, big eyes, a face that looked hauntingly familiar. She stared at it. Daniel leaned over. "Do you know him?" he asked softly. Maggie shook her head, but her lips trembled. Daniel picked up the locket and opened it. Inside was a faded picture of the same boy with Sienna holding him, and on the back another little inscription, "My son, who will come to find his father." Maggie looked from Daniel to the photo, back to the locket. Her chest felt hollow. "Why do this now?" she gasped. The house suddenly felt quiet. Everything felt fragile. Daniel's heart thudded. He looked at Maggie. Shock, fear, confusion all at once in her eyes. He realized this wasn't just a threat. This was a secret, one that changed everything. Maggie sank onto the chair, stunned. The locket clutched in her hand. Daniel kneeled in front of her. "We'll get to the bottom of this," he said, voice firm. "Whatever this is, we face it together." Maggie nodded because she had no strength to speak. They sat there, the envelope and photo and locket laid in front of them like evidence. Outside, the late sun shone faint through the window. The letter had opened a door into something bigger, and they both felt it. Once you open a door to a secret, it doesn't always snap shut cleanly. The photo and the locket shook Maggie more than she wanted to admit. She sat frozen, staring down at the boy's face, trying to place him in her memory. Her heart pounded. Daniel sat beside her, silent, watching every flicker of her expression. Chris hovered near the door. He looked worried, like he'd walked into something bigger than he expected. The silence stretched until Maggie's voice cracked. How did she get this?" Daniel rubbed his chin. "I don't know, but this means she's keeping something from us. Something big." Maggie closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. The boy in the picture looked so much like Daniel. Same eyes, bone structure. She almost gasped. Chris cleared his throat. This could be something more than just a threat. This could rewrite things. Maggie reached out and ran her fingers over the photo. "He's her son," she whispered. "Years ago, before she was with you, before any of this." Daniel's breath caught. "If that's true, then this changes everything." Maggie's hands shook. She stood up slowly. "I need to call someone." She grabbed her phone, fumbled through contacts. She dialed a number she hadn't used in years, one she was afraid to call. It rang. A man's voice answered, thick, tired. "Hello? Is this Mark Bennett?" Maggie asked, voice trembling. "Yes," he replied. "It's Maggie Collins." Silence. Then Mark's voice cracked. I didn't expect this." Maggie swallowed. "Do you know this boy?" She held up the picture to the camera. Do you know who he is? Mark's breath came fast. Yes, I do. That's my son. Maggie's heart dropped. Daniel's jaw went slack. Mark continued, voice ragged. He's yours too, Maggie. Maggie stared at her phone as though it were burning. No, she whispered. He was born 2 months after I left Siena. Mark said it like he was trying to hold himself together. I tried to tell her she didn't want to hear it, she didn't want to keep him. Maggie sank to the floor, tears spilling. Daniel slid down to her side. Chris moved closer. Mark's voice broke again. I've waited for years, but I kept my distance because I believed she said he died, or she made me believe it. She told you he died? Maggie asked, barely a breath. Yes. Mark paused. She told everyone he died the night she gave him up. Maggie's head spun. She looked at the locket, looked at Daniel, looked back to her phone. She's a liar, Daniel said softly, eyes fierce. Mark spoke again, quieter. I've watched him grow with another family, but I needed to see this. Needed confirmation. I got this from a private investigator I hired. Chris stood up, pacing. So she didn't just plant the earring. She's been lying about everything. Daniel wrapped an arm around Maggie. You're not alone anymore. Maggie lifted the photo, held it up to Daniel. He's your son. Daniel's throat throbbed. My son. She nodded. Tears streamed freely. Chris closed the door behind him. Mark spoke one last time before they hung up. I want our son's life to be stable. I don't want drama for him, but this needed to come out. The room felt too small, too bright, too loud. Maggie sank into Daniel's lap, clutching the photo. Daniel pressed his lips to her hair. What do we do now? Maggie asked, voice barely above a sob. Daniel looked at the image again, breathing slow. We tell him the truth. We bring him here, when we can, and prove who we are. Chris nodded, leaning forward. And we make sure nobody damages him with lies. The reality of it all crashed over Maggie. Her life all this time had been based on someone else's lies. The humiliation, the pain, the secret fights in her head, all tangled around a child she never even knew existed. She pressed her forehead against Daniel's chest, closed her eyes. He held her. Chris watched. The locket sat open on the desk, its photo matching the one in her hands. And as the dusk light slipped through the window, everything they believed about loyalty, deception, love, and truth warped into a new shape, one they had no choice but to live in. The mask was gone. The secret was out. Now they would have to face what came next, together.